All right, fantastic. Hi. As a nation, we go through these subtle shifts that speaks to larger changes happening kind of across society. Let me give you a couple of examples. For decades, baseball was America's favorite pastime, a sport made for lazy days with families at the ballpark. Well, in 1972, after decades of making progress on baseball, football became America's favorite pastime. What better to celebrate American culture than lazy Sundays on a couch with lots of commercial breaks doing what we do best as Americans, toughing our face? Well, in 1992, there was another shift. Demographics were changing across America, and salsa overtook ketchup as America's favorite condiment. In 2008, we all learned that we could avoid massively unpleasant conversations, asking our wives to take the dry cleaning, asking someone to pick up the kids for us, or worse yet, calling in late for work. So in 2008, text messaging overcame phone calling as our favorite way of communicating. 2 years ago, in 2013, for the first time ever, the majority of children in public schools were from non-white families, Asians, Latinos, Hispanics, African Americans, or like my children, multiracial. Last year, again, for the first time ever, the majority of children in America's public school systems were from low-income homes. The first time ever in American history that this has happened. But something else has been changing in America. Even as we've seen a lot of shifts demographically, one thing has remained the same. A record number of children are in America's public school systems. And a record number of those people, those children, those parents, believe in this thing called the American dream. Now, I don't know that I have the perfect definition of what the American dream is, but when I think of the American dream, I think about two truths that we tell ourselves, that we tell our citizens, and that parents tell their children. One of them is that if you work hard and give it your all, you can be anything you want to be. The second thing that we tell our citizens is a story of intergenerational advancement, this idea that our children will be better off than we were. So we should ask ourselves, if we now have more children in public schools than in the history of America, and the majority of those children come from low-income homes, and the majority of those children are from minority backgrounds, how likely are they to do better than their parents? How often do they actually achieve the American dream? Well, it turns out that all of these things are mixed together in a very complicated way. Public schools, shifting demographics, technology, these cultural changes that at some times have seemed slow and at other times have been sudden and seismic. Low-income children in America, these are children from families earning less than $35,000 a year. Over the last 45 years, from 1970 to today, we've seen a measly 3 percentage point increase in the percentage of those children who are graduating college with a four-year degree. At the same time, children from the other end of the economic spectrum, that's families who are earning over $100,000 a year, that might be a household led by 2 mid-career teachers, or maybe a household led by an accountant and a secretary, hardly 1%ers, they have seen their rates of success go from a 40% graduation rate to 70%. And if upper-income families are able to get their children on a college campus for the first day of their freshman year, that number jumps to 99%. Think about that. 9% versus 99%. Well, this is about the time when people normally say, but college is expensive. College debt is crushing our young people today. The most expensive college degree is the one that our young people don't get. Well, why do I say that? If you grow up poor in America and you never get your college degree, you only have a coin flip of a chance, a 50-50 likelihood of escaping poverty. I'm not even talking about becoming wealthy. I'm just talking about escaping poverty and being lucky enough to live paycheck to paycheck. If, however, you're born into a low-income family and you earn your college degree, your odds of success skyrocket to 90%. But why does a college degree matter? What does a college degree have to do with the American dream? Well, in terms of escaping poverty, it makes all the difference in the world. But when children from low-income families fail to graduate college, they don't just end up with a smaller paycheck or a junkier car or a slightly higher degree of unemployment. They actually experience a very different America. Consider for a moment the connection between education and freedom for our African American boys in America today. Without a high school degree, 68% of African American boys will be incarcerated in a prison. I don't mean jail, I mean prison at some point in their lifetime. If we get our youth from inner cities who are African American who graduate high school, those percentages plummet to 21% incarceration rate. And if we can ensure that they get a college degree, those numbers go all the way down to a 6% incarceration rate. But let me show another slide here that should scare all of us. And rather than narrating, let me just let you guys soak it up and take a look at it for just a moment. Today in America, there are 3 times as many African Americans in prison beds than dorm beds. There are twice as many Hispanics in prison beds than in dorm rooms. And regardless of your racial background, if you're a male, things don't look so good for Americans today. And all of these challenges that we have with our K-12 education system, they actually make a difference in terms of how well the United States is able to compete economically. And because of our failing education system, we are the 3rd most unequal society on this planet, barely ahead of Turkey and Mexico. Because kids in public schools are a low-income minority, and because our schools don't serve those students well, we are perhaps just one generation away from being a second a nation struck by poverty. But I look at these statistics and I'm actually optimistic. Not because I feel like everything will be perfect in the future, but because I know that this problem is fixable. I know that this challenge is solvable. I know that as big as the challenges are that we have facing us, we actually can do something to bend the arc of history towards justice for all Americans. And I know this because I've been grappling with this issue over the last 20 years. 20 years ago, I was a senior at Georgetown University with graduation looming and no job prospects on the horizon. And in a fit of desperation, I applied to this program called Teach for America. And I was assigned to teach 4th grade in Donna, Texas. And I butted up against these statistics in a very personal nature. I saw in my own classroom what it meant for students to be 2 to 3 grade levels behind. And I was frustrated and I was angry and I did a lot of blaming. I blamed parents for not being involved. I blamed the students for not being motivated. I blamed poverty for all of the challenges that came with that. But as the school year settled in and I began teaching, I actually learned something pretty remarkable. I saw that the students in my classroom were amazing young people. These 20 or so 9 and 10-year-olds had dreams that were as big as dreams of any children in America. They were kind, they were loving, they were empathetic, they were supportive of each other. They also happened to have a hard time reading, so we read more. They had a hard time doing math problems, so we did a lot more math problems. They had a really challenging time when it came to writing, so we wrote and we wrote and we wrote until those blisters on their fingers turned into writing calluses. And at the end of that first year, every single one of those students was on grade level. And I didn't want to lose those hard-earned gains that we had won, so I convinced my principal to let me keep those students as 5th graders, even as I brought in a new group of 4th grade students, but I knew I couldn't do it on my own. So I enlisted the help of like-minded colleagues on my campus, and we created this little after-school program called I.D.E.A Academy. And at the end of that year, our results were even better, mostly because the people who I recruited to our program actually knew how to teach. What a difference that makes when you're an educator. Knowing how to teach is a good thing, I found. And at the end of that second year, the results were fantastic. And what that showed me is that there's nothing as powerful as the impact of a great teacher. Not poverty, not demographics, not parent education level, that on a small setting, in a single classroom, the power of a transformational teacher is a bigger impact than any other force facing our young people. But I began to wonder, is it possible for us to achieve the success at scale? You know, one classroom is nice, but could we do this with a whole grade level, with a whole school, even a whole system of schools? Well, I was soon able to find the answer to that question because the school district had axed our funding and shut down the program that we had worked so hard to start. So I did what any 24-year-old with 2 years of experience under his belt would do. I decided to start a school from scratch. I wrote a letter to the Texas Education Agency. I testified before the State Board of Education, and to my shock, they gave us permission to start a school. They gave us a contract, a charter, and they said, you have 5 years to make it work. Well, we were big on dreams, but we were a struggling nonprofit, so we were short on money. And we had a really hard time getting that building ready for the first day of school. It was a dilapidated old building that we were renting from the First Baptist Church in downtown Donna, Texas. And out of desperation, I put a phone call out to all of the parents and all of the students and said, this is going to be an amazing school. If you stick with us, we'll stick with you. I'll get your son, I'll get your daughter to college and through college. But to do that, we need a building. And there's no way this building is going to be finished on time. So the parents did something that shocked me. They showed up the very next day with their power tools, with their cans of paint, and they got busy getting the school ready for the first day. And the first day of school came and the building was ready and all the students showed up. And at the end of the first day, I was shocked with what the parents and what the students had done. But I was also pretty proud of myself. I thought, hey, this running a school thing is not so hard after all. And then disaster struck. I received a phone call. It was one of our bus drivers, Omar Pacheco, informing me that our bus was on fire on North Hutto Road, a little bit north of the expressway in Donna. I jumped in my 1997 Cherry Red Mustang and I drove over there as quickly as I could. And as I drove up to the site, I could see on the horizon these billowing clouds of black smoke just off into the air, and I thought, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? And I show up there, and there's Omar, but there's no students. Omar, where are the students? I said. Don't worry, Mr. Torkelson. Mrs. Prado came by and put them all in the back of her pickup truck. She's dropping them off right now. Thank God, I said. Do you think she's available tomorrow as well? So you would think that a 24-year-old with no experience in a dilapidated building with buses that were combustible had no chance of opening up a school that was actually successful. Well, by the end of our first year, we had hundreds of students on the waiting list. By the end of my 5th year, we had thousands of students on the waiting list. By the end of the 7th year, that first batch of 4th graders who I had taught my first year of teaching were seniors in high school, and 100% of them applied to a 4-year college university. And 100% of them were accepted to a 4-year college university, and get this, 100% of them actually attended and stepped foot in a campus for the first day of their freshman year. But about this time, I was thinking, this is fantastic, but we're not making a dent in the challenge. The solution that I.D.E.A. Public Schools is offering isn't matching the size of the challenge that we're facing. And I thought about opening up more schools, but I didn't know where to get the funding. Around the same time I was thinking this, I got a phone call from none other than the richest man in the world, Bill Gates. Bill said, Tom, we've been watching your work from up here in Seattle, and we're impressed and we're inspired. We want to help you grow. I said, well, it's funny you say that, Bill, because I've been thinking about growing. Now, look, I was raised in the Midwest, and my mother always told me it's very rude to talk about money. And my father always said, if you ever ask people for money, not only is it rude, but we're going to disown you. So when I was writing this application for the Gates Foundation, and I sent it off in the mail, I was terrified. What if they think I'm greedy? I thought to myself. What if I'm asking for too much money? Well, a couple of weeks later, my worst fears were confirmed. I got a phone call back from the Gates Foundation, and they said, Mr. Torkelson, we have reviewed your application. My heart was pounding. I think we asked them for $200,000 or $300,000. I was sinking lower and lower in my chair. What are they going to say? And she said, we don't make gifts under $1 million. We're going to send a team of MBAs down to your program, and we're going to help you write a real business plan. Well, the MBAs came, the business plan got written, and before I knew it, with the investment of the Gates Foundation and many others, we had raised $30 million to help take our one little school in the RGV to multiple schools. So, fast forward to where we are today. That one school has grown to 44. Those 150 students are now 25,000 students in San Antonio, Austin, and the Rio Grande Valley. Last year, 32,000 kids applied to I.D.E.A. Public Schools. This is why I know that we can fix America's public schools, because we've done it here in the Rio Grande Valley. We're doing it in San Antonio. We're doing it in Austin. And the students who we teach are the students we've always taught. Students from modest means who have big dreams. And when I think about those students, I think about one student in particular, particularly at this time in our nation when the immigration rhetoric has been so heated and so ugly and so horrible. And I think about a young man named Omar, not related to the bus driver, and he came to our school about 7 years ago. And he came to our school by way of Matamoros. He was living in an orphanage in Matamoros, the border community, just on the other side of the Rio Grande across from Brownsville. And he was living in an orphanage, and he had heard that he had a relative in the RGV. So one night, he broke out of the orphanage, and under the light of the stars and the full moon, he crossed the Rio Grande as a 14-year-old boy. But it wasn't just him crossing. He had his 2-year-old brother on his shoulders, if you can imagine. He finds his way to Brownsville. He finds his aunt. Somehow, miraculously, he applies to I.D.E.A. Public Schools. He's accepted to the I.D.E.A. Public Schools lottery. He shows up for the first day of his freshman class not speaking a lick of English. Well, good-looking kid, so with the help of a lot of young ladies who took him under his wing and his teachers, he learned English really quickly. And he also mastered all of his advanced placement courses, and by his senior year, this kid was ready to go off to college. It was second semester of senior year, and he's driving to his after-school job, and he gets pulled over for a routine traffic violation. "Where's your license?" the officer asks. "I don't have it." "Why not?" "Because I'm here illegally." Now, if you're in the RGV, you know to never, ever, ever say that to law enforcement, but he's an honest kid. So while other students were planning for their senior prom, he was in a federal detention center in Raymondville, Texas, fighting to not be deported. Well, with the help of some amazing educators who were shuttling work to and forth to the detention center every day, and a great immigration attorney, and an amazing school principal, Omar was able to get his citizenship, or his status rather, and remain here legally. I remember seeing Omar after he'd been accepted to Texas A&M, but before he left. And I saw him in our offices one day, and he reached into his pocket, and he pulled out his wallet. And from his wallet, he fished out this plastic card. It was some sort of a government-issued student ID. And he said, "Mr. Torkelson, I'm here legally now. It's legal for me to dream." "Even in America," I said, "especially in America." And with that, I want to leave you with the thought that when the adults in the public education school system get it right, when the adults in our agencies get it right, there's nothing that our young people can't achieve. Thank you.